Welcome, everybody, to Stay Curious. I'm your host, Mark Marquette. We're broadcasting live from the American Space Museum studio inside downtown Titusville. And that's my way of introducing, in an awkward way, our guest today, Mr. Bob Granath. Hello, Bob.
Yeah. Hello, Mark.
That didn't
Good to be
flow
here.
out like I wanted to.
Yeah.
Bob is a public relations officer for these companies below here in NASA, Lockheed Martin, United Space Alliance, that was the contractor for the last 10 years of shuttle launches.
Yeah.
And we've enjoyed Bob now for almost a year, providing us a monthly history lesson of sorts. Bob, thank you so much. Hope things are going well with you. Let's talk a
Yeah.
moment here before we get into your program on Bumper 8 here, shown in this
Yeah.
picture. Many of you
Right.
may know what Bumper 8 is, maybe you don't. But how about Starship 10?
Oh,
You
yeah.
watched that
Yeah.
yesterday.
After all their attempts, they finally had one working exactly the way they planned. It was exciting to see get that off because such a big rocket, and it's such a big part of NASA's plans going back to the moon and then beyond that.
Absolutely. I was completely mesmerized, watched all 90 minutes of it from launch
Oh,
to
yeah.
landing in the ocean, right near a buoy that had a camera on it. The precision of these massive, and I mean massive
Oh, yeah.
rockets now is amazing. They can really land it on a dime, can't they?
Yeah, that's what amazed me the most. The fact that the rocket worked for the first time in 10 tries was almost fascinating as the fact that they have a buoy sitting in the Indian Ocean, and they could put that thing right down next to the buoy that they had as the planned landing site.
Yeah.
So you launch something that big, send it halfway around the world, and you know exactly where it's going to come down.
I mean, it's amazing, and it was pointing in the right direction. It must have had some homing device on there. I'm trying to pull up my American Space Museum YouTube channel here, so we can get you all involved in the show today. Let's see here. I'm not doing that successfully yet, but there we are, up there live on today's program. Uh, and we've got already watching today Dave Stange. Dave, really appreciates your history lesson. I think you met Dave at
Oh,
Shuttle
yeah.
Fest 4. Keith Sewell, hello to you in Arkansas. Cliff Watson's up early. What's your brekkie like on Thursday morning there in Pomona, Australia, mate? And RG Jubilee has joined us today, as well as Dean Babcock. So we've got a good program for you. I let this gentleman just kind of roll with what he's put together. But again, Bob, we do appreciate how you have enhanced Stay Curious with your stories here. We want people to know that, by the way, we have an auction Saturday. I'm covering Facebook with it. You ever watched our auctions before?
I have, yes.
Marty and I were talking about it yesterday. If you're a little light in the wall at this auction, and we do about 6 a year, it is an awesome history lesson.
Oh, it is.
Don't you
That's
see
why I
things?
enjoy it. Yeah, it's just, seeing the memorabilia that comes in and seeing what people have collected over the years is a lot of fun just to see what's out there.
Or you'll see a button or a bumper sticker or something. You go, I didn't know they did that.
Oh, yeah.
You know, yeah, or there's a lot of space flown artifacts. How about Neil Armstrong's X-ray on his boots that are left on the moon? That is $1,000 item for sure. And you know why they X-rayed their spacesuits, don't you?
I haven't heard that. Yeah.
Well, the contract for all the Apollo suits was the International Latex Corporation,
Right.
better known as Playtex. So the best seamstresses in the world, they had to make sure they didn't leave a pin or a needle in their work.
Ah,
All
yeah.
right, so they
Okay,
X-rayed.
yeah.
Yep, and there's a good book on that. They actually thought, how are we going to X-ray all this stuff? We can't afford to buy an X-ray machine, so they bartered with the nearby hospital to take spacesuits over there and put them in their X-ray department. So you can own a piece of history like that at our auction Saturday. The gavel falls at noon. Chuck Jeffrey and Bid Again Auctions again providing the museum with some cash flow. This is a good cash flow event for us. We're transparent about, as a nonprofit, we get $5,000 to up to $10,000 in auction on profit that we get off of consignments and things that we put in that we sell that we're not using in our museum. So, again, if you're interested in that sort of thing or have a collection at home, here's how to get a hold of Chuck, Jeffrey, and we'll talk Friday more in depth about the auction. We did yesterday's program at the end of it, talk about the auction. So, honest appraisals from a guy that will shoot you straight. Tell us a little bit about your website, Bob. How long has this been up, and what kind of things will our Stay Curious watchers find on your
Okay.
website?
I made the website live on August the 1st, 2019, which just a few minutes or a few months after I retired. And
Okay.
I had all these stories that people have been telling me over the years and stories that I wanted to tell. And so I thought, well, what better way to do this and put a website out there? And so what I decided is with my own website, I can tell what I want, when I want, the way I want to tell it. And so the only person that I have to run that by is I have my wife, a former English teacher, proofread the articles that I write to make sure I'm grammatically correct and that what I'm saying makes sense.
Now, you hinted around there about your career as a writer and a facilitator of news from Lockheed or the shuttle era
Oh, yeah.
there. So you're telling me you present your story to somebody in the organization, they say, Bob, we want you to do this instead of that?
Yeah, well, that's it. A lot of times what would happen is people would come up with an idea for a story, and I said, yeah, I'd like to write about that. So I go out and talk to people who were involved, write it up, send it to them, make sure I had it straight, and then run it through management. They'd look at it, and then we'd publish it. With Lockheed, we put it in our company newspaper and other publications. And over the years, when I
See,
got
Stargazer was the Lockheed Martin
Lockheed
one,
was
wasn't it?
the company newspaper. I did it at Lockheed. Did that for 13 years, and was turned out to be very popular. We'd ship it off to the NASA astronaut office in Houston. A lot of the astronauts would see it when they'd be visiting Kennedy, and I'd be taking pictures of them. When is this going? I'm going to go in the Stargazer. Oh yeah, we get that. Oh, glad to hear we're getting in the Stargazer. That sort of thing. So that went well. And then, of course, I did a lot of work for the NASA website. To give you an example, when I was working at the NASA press site, um, the idea came in from Janet Petro, who was then the deputy center director at Kennedy Space Center. And she said, you know, we really need to tell the story of how Kennedy Space Center became the premier multi-user spaceport. And I said, I want to do that one. And so I had the opportunity to go to her office and sit down with her and have her tell the story of how she and Bob Cabana, working with a team of people, started doing things different from where it had ever been done before. Previously, Kennedy Space Center had been a government-run site where contractors come in and do things NASA pays them to do. When they transitioned to a multi-user spaceport, then they opened it up and have all these facilities that we used in the space shuttle program we don't need. And so they let companies come in, take over a launch pad or a building and run that. And NASA just sort of lets them operate. And NASA just sort of makes sure that this contractor doesn't get in the way of this partner. And so having that story told was quite a privilege to do that and let her tell that story and me write it up. And of course, once I write it up, I send it to her and make sure everything's straight. She thought of some other things and added some additional material to it. And then we put it on the NASA website. And so, you know, my job over the years has been to be a storyteller, to listen to what people are doing out there and then tell their story. Because I really enjoy doing that. And that allowed me to go out into all areas of the Kennedy Space Center, whether it's deep in the logistics warehouse or inside the crew module of a space shuttle orbiter. I had a chance to go all these people and talk to the people, find out what they do and tell their story. And so the thing that has been such a privilege for me is be able to tell stories that other people have told me.
Sounds like a dream job to quite a few of us out there.
Oh, yeah.
Me, of course, being a journalist since 15 years old and in newspapers and photographer, I relate a lot to that. But I'm glad you shared that because a lot of people vital work to any business to have the proper public relations out there, and it's a certain kind of person I think that can create the stories. And
Right.
you've obviously enjoyed that a lot. Next time I see one of those Lockheed Stargazer uh, magazines, I'll grab it and bring it in. We see a lot of the old trade publications
Oh
like
yeah.
that out there. We'll bring a few in and maybe just talk off the cuff about that today
All right. Sounds
on,
good.
on the next time around there. But once again, check out Bob's website there. If you see a story there that you'd like for him to elaborate more on a Stay Curious episode, I'm sure he'd be glad to hear from you or contact me, and we'll effort that out. There's his email right there. So, but Bob, we've got a show here that you put together. Um, that we've got the. Let me go to the next one there. There we go. We're going to talk about this bad boy right there.
Yeah.
And I got one right here next to me. Okay. Check
Yeah.
this out. I've got our museum.
Yeah.
This is a V2 rocket. And we're calling it Bumper. I'm taking it over there and I'm sending it over to Marty Winkle. Here, catch our museum quality. I'm teasing you, Marty. Just my way of saying hi to Marty Winkle. Working on our Streamlabs board there. He'll be watching for your questions. Give Bob a chance to get wound up with his program here because I know he'll probably answer your questions. But yes, we honored this little rocket that
Yep.
started it all 75 years ago in Cape Canaveral. So take it
That's
away
right.
for me,
All
Bob.
right. Well, and that's the rocket that was the first rocket to take off from Cape Canaveral. And you go back to the summer of 1950, and people on the Space Coast were completely unaware that they were going to become the Space Coast. It was Titusville, it was Cocoa Beach, the area around North Brevard County. And then a warm, sunny morning on July the 24th, 1950, people looked out and they saw this strange light going up straight up into the sky and sort of disappearing over the horizon. And shortly after they saw the bright light like a flame rising into the air, they heard this rumble and wondered what in the world was that. Well, what it was, if you as you look at it, it looks a lot like the V2 that was built by the Germans during World War II as a weapon of war. And then after the war, the team that built that, there were 115 that came over with Dr. Werner von Braun, and they came with 100 of these rockets that they could take to the desert in New Mexico at the White Sands Proving Ground and launch those for upper atmospheric research.
100 of them they captured,
They,
huh?
they brought in 100, and I think over the years they launched about 64 of them. But what happened is that pencil-like vehicle up at the top, that's an Army WAC Corporal sounding rocket that was used for upper atmospheric research. They simply put one on top of a V2, launched that, and that's how the space program began at Cape Canaveral. Uh, the It was launched at 9:28 a.m. on July the 24th.
Now there's one of the
1950.
most iconic pictures on the
Oh yeah,
space age right
and
there.
and there's that first launch from Cape Canaveral, and what it
See
involved is the main missile here is, as I said, the V2. When it was developed by the German rocket team, they called it an A4 for aggregate 4. It was the fourth in a series of rockets that they were building, and of course their goal was to build spaceships and explore space. But once it became operational and they found the thing actually worked, the NASA propaganda ministry renamed it V2, short for Vergeltungswaffen 2, the Revenge Weapon 2.
Okay.
And so that's how it went from an A4 to a V2, but it was used in this flight for a low-angle atmospheric research. And as I said, it was developed as a 60-foot tall missile for the Germans in the war.
60 foot to here.
Right.
And so then you got the
Yeah. And then
research rocket. Right?
the Whack Corporal itself was a little bit smaller than that. It was developed originally by the Jet Propulsion Laboratory under the California Institute of Technology. And the Whack Corporal was used as an atmospheric sounding rocket. We were simply in a stage in the late 1940s and early 50s trying to understand what's going on in the upper atmosphere and trying to understand what it's going to be like when we start sending rockets actually going into space. And one of the important things about the V2 itself is when it was being tested in Germany, on June the 20th, 1944, it became the first human-made object to reach outer space. And Theodore,
1944.
the
I guess this
physicist
is it here, right?
Theodore von Karman is the one who decided that at 62 kilometers or 100 kilometers or 62 miles is the threshold of outer space. And that V2 that was launched from Peenemünde in Germany in 1944 was the first one to get up high enough to go into space. And that one actually went up well over 100 miles into space. And so the people who launched it had a big celebration because they were talking about what they wanted to do about exploring space. And this is sort of the beginning of the space age in their viewpoint. And of course, it got a lot of them in trouble with the Nazi government because they wanted them to build a weapon of war. Well, they came over at the end of the war. We originally sent them out to Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas, so where they lived, and then they would go across the state line into New Mexico to launch these rockets. And so this became the
This is
Whack,
a picture here.
yeah, the V2 Whack Corporal combination became the world's first liquid propellant two-stage rocket. And so you have this stage, and this is the second stage. And it was at the time kept pretty much a tight military secret of what was going on, but people were seeing that it was taking off. Like I say, they continued launching these from White's.
Yeah.
White Sounds, yeah. Yeah, this photograph shows Werner von Braun, who was heading up this team at White Sands.
Didn't recognize it.
Yeah, and he's standing next to one of the rockets that's turned on his side at White Sands because in the late 1940s, word was beginning to get out that we had a group of German scientists who were now using their weapon of war as a peaceful way of exploring the atmosphere and beginning to do some serious planning on sending rockets out into space. And so it became a quite popular thing as people thought, is space travel really possible? Some people had watched the old movies of Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and the ideas of people flying around in space. And well, they started telling the story that this sort of thing actually will be possible sometime in the near future. And so there were some articles published in Collier's magazine in particular telling the story of how the day is coming very soon when we will actually have people traveling into outer space. And so there were a lot of people at the time who doubted that it could happen, but there were also people saying this may be where our future lies.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
well, science fiction was very prevalent with, the War of the Worlds and Mars, and we grew up a little bit with Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon and so forth. So,
I remember
finally becoming real.
I remember seeing the Buck Rogers stuff on television. These were old movies by the time I was seeing them in the 1950s.
Right.
And I asked my mom and dad about people going into space, and they both kind of laughed and said, well, no one's ever been actually in space. And I said, so I guess it's just a movie. They said, yeah, that's right. But they told me there are people down at Cape Canaveral working towards actually doing that. And my dad grew up in the era when Charles Lindbergh and Admiral Byrd and Amelia Earhart were doing these flights, setting new records in aviation. And Dad would listen on the radio with fascination about what these people were doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, I'm going to get to experience that watching as the first people go out into outer space, and it will be just as exciting, and it was. And that's how I originally got interested in space, is hearing the people talk about what we can do and then seeing Americans actually doing it.
Hmm. Absolutely. And the growing up and watching this come to fruition is amazing, particularly watching the Starship 10 yesterday and see that it really started here at the Cape with this, and we could see that behemoth of a rocket launch up here someday. Very, very interesting life, I think, that us baby boomers have had watching all this unfold. Marty's got a question from one of you intelligent watchers today.
Well, we have three questions, Mark. The first one's from Dean Babcock. What launch complex was this launch from at the Cape?
What was the first
What
What
launch
launch
complex?
complex?
It was Launch Complex 3. They began building 3 very rudimentary launch pads, and we'll see some pictures of that in a little bit. And so they knew about the kind of rocket they'd be launching, things like this V2 rocket and be rockets similar to that. And so they just built something that was very rudimentary that could support this kind of rocket. But the idea, as rockets would get bigger, these launch pads would get bigger as well. Bumper 8 actually launched from Launch Pad 3. They had built 3 at that point, so they launched it off the third one. So that was the first launch pad at the Cape used for a rocket launch.
Okay.
Mr.
Bear in mind, Bob may answer your question with one of his slides here. And we've got some good ones there. Go ahead, Marty.
And Michael Bruno's asking, do you know how many V2s did the U.S. bring over from Germany? And I think you said 100.
They brought over 100, and between 1947 and 1952, between White Sands and Cape Canaveral, we launched about 64 of them.
Okay, we've got a question from Carlton Bailey. Mark knows all about depth of field. Any idea how close those photographers are to the launch? No one can give me an answer. Depth of fields could put them anywhere from a few hundred feet to, you can say to what?
Carlton's asking how far away those were. There's a real photographer, still photographer, movie photographer, and as Carlton says, a telephoto lens makes it look like they're really close.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand, in this picture where you see photographers standing near the rocket, they're about 100 yards away.
Football field, then.
Yeah, about a
soccer
football
pitch.
field away.
To you on
Yeah.
your okay.
Kind of close when you consider that when we launch rockets from Pad 39A, such as the Falcon 9s that go off now, or the space shuttles before that, the Apollo Saturn V, the Launch Control Center was 3 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, they're about 100 yards away.
Well, using logic, we have a Cape Canaveral gallery. Marty knows that I've asked some of the old timers, and one of the maps we have there shows the blockhouse looking like a round bomb shelter, spherical, and the rockets out there. And I'm going, if this is in ratio, boy, you're awful close to that rocket.
Yeah.
And Murphy Wardman, who passed away last year, lead electrical engineer on Pad 36, said, well, Mark, electricity wouldn't travel further than 600 feet in the 1950s on a copper line. Yep. All right, and keep all of its electrical power. 600 feet was the limit in the late 50s, early 60s, and then they went out to a quarter a mile and built Pad 36B out there.
Oh, yeah.
So, yes, and Murphy also said they would always, when a rocket went up about this high, a couple hundred, less than 100 feet in the air, they'd all leave their desks, go outside and see it, go the rest of the way up to space, and one blew up, like a lot of them did, and Murphy said he heard some shrapnel whiz by his head. And from then on, they waited until it got a little bit higher up, like 1,000 feet before they went out, not 100 feet. So there was dangerous. And explosion here, you telling me that wasn't going to hurt those guys? But thank you for the question, Carlton. And I would say football field's probably about right. Interestingly, if you stood that close to the Saturn V, it'd kill you with the sound.
Well, the sound was just enormous. In fact, I remember Walter Cronkite broadcasting the first Saturn V launch said, even here 3 miles away, it'll hit about 130 decibels.
Yeah, the windows were rattling.
Oh,
at
yeah.
The first one, he
Oh,
thought
yeah.
their building was going to fall in there.
Yep.
Good old Walter Cronkite of CBS. For you youngsters out there, he was everybody's grandfather of the news. You trusted what he said. So very influential to both our careers. I'm
Oh,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well,
All right,
one of the
let
things
you keep
about
going.
the bumper series where they started launching the V2s with the Whack Corporal on the second stage is one of these was the first American vehicle to reach outer space. And then one of the things they did next is they put a 35 millimeter movie camera in one, and it brought back photographs like this. This is the first view of what the Earth looks like from outer space. We're used to seeing that now
Absolutely.
after so many years of space flight, but that was a new thing back in the late 1940s to see what our home planet looks like from the level when you're high enough to be considered out in space.
Now these were launched out at New Mexico.
That's right, at the White Sands
White
Proving
Sands
Ground.
Proving
That's right.
Ground.
Yeah, the way that the
There's our
V2
Corporal
and
here.
Whack Corporal worked is when they came up with the idea of doing this, they hired the General Electric Company to be the contractor to put all this together and to make it work. And as it was going up, when the V2 got to a certain speed, it would send a signal to ignite the engine in the Whack Corporal. And when that happened, it would begin to fire, and the flame from the rocket on the Whack Corporal would burn through a wire, which would then shut down the engine in the V2.
Is that right?
And then the Whack Corporal would slide up a tube and continue out into space. And
We've
because
got that tube right there, by the way.
Yeah.
Looks like
that's it.
on our model.
And so, like I say, that was the first two-stage liquid propellant rocket. They'd made some fireworks rockets, but and when you have a liquid propellant rocket, that's something can actually get into space, and that allowed us to reach a much higher altitude than
So
we'd
there
ever
was
been
a
able to reach.
physical burning of a wire by the
Right.
Whack Corporal's exhaust that signaled the shut off to this engine on here.
That's correct.
Boy, what engineer thought of that? That
Yeah.
would be the solution. Is what
Well,
I'm gonna say.
And then what happens is as you get up to a certain level in the altitude, there's a point where air turbulence from either downdrafts or updrafts, and then traveling a rocket through that can reach something that creates something of a bump. Hence the name of calling this bumper. It's getting it
Okay.
high enough to make that bump into the atmosphere and actually getting up high enough to start launching these into space.
There's another.
And so,
By the way, I've noticed on like this picture, you can't tell it there. It's just slightly out of focus, and the clouds are in focus because the shutter speed and the film speed couldn't. The rocket was slightly faster, and you got a little motion.
yeah, that's right. Well, that's the challenge that I face when I've got my camera and taking pictures of launches out at the Space Center. Is I have it on autofocus because as it moves, I can't keep focusing it enough manually, so I keep it on automatic focus. And so as the rocket is traveling up and the autofocus is hitting off of clouds nearby, sometimes I get pictures out of focus because it focused on the cloud and not the rocket
There
itself.
you go. There you go. Flip it to manual, from A to manual. I shoot a lot
yeah.
in manual when I got a 35. Yes, Marty's got a question for Robert Granath. Hope you're enjoying our program today on the first rocket launched 75 years ago in Cape Canaveral last month, Bumper 8. Marty?
Two questions, one from me and one from Michael Bruno. So I'll ask mine first. Where did the name Whack Corporal come from?
Somewhere in my research, I remember seeing that, and whack. First, I thought it was referring to a woman's Army Corps corporal, but that's not it. I have to admit, I don't remember what it was that I read on that. but there was some rationale for the name.
Okay. And Michael Bruno is asking, did they even consider trying to put an astronaut on a V2?
I don't think there was ever a plan to do that.
Maybe an armadillo.
Well,
We've
some of
heard
the
stories of them strapping a few living creatures on the sides of these rockets.
Yeah, well, back in Germany, as they were looking for an A4, A5, up to A9 and A10, an A10 might have been big enough to put a pilot in it. The A9 is what Hitler called the New York rocket because it would have been a version of the V2 big enough to be an intercontinental ballistic missile. It's an idea that never got off the drawing board, never really was seriously considered, but there were visions of rockets getting bigger and bigger. And in fact, some of the visions of a much larger V2 actually over the next few years morphed into plans for the Saturn rocket that they did develop at the Marshall Space Flight Center.
Good questions. Thank you so much.
Well, this photograph that's up right now was the first bumper rocket launched from White Sands that actually got up into space. It went 20 miles high before the V2 engine cut off. It actually traveled at 3,600 miles per hour, and eventually it reached an altitude of 250 miles. It's the first launch from the United States to reach outer space. And so we launched 6 of these bumpers from White Sands. The first 3 or 4 were sort of test. The bumper 5 was the first one where everything was fully fueled, and that one worked very well. Then a subsequent one is one that had the camera on it and sent back the first pictures from space. And then when they got ready to do bumpers 7 and 8, they moved them to Cape Canaveral and got ready to have the first launch from what was called the Long Range Proving Ground at Cape Canaveral. Now this photograph, well, you'll begin to see how rudimentary things are. The gantry around this version of the bumper rocket at the Cape is just basically construction scaffolding.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just built that and added to it and added to it, and that's how they got around to the various levels of the rocket to do servicing prior to launch. And then if you check on to the next slide, you'll see an aerial shot that they have a 100-foot square cement platform that they put the launch pedestal right in the middle of it. And so the entire launch complex was fairly small at the time as well. And then the next slide will show.
I'm kind of looking at that and seeing where those photographers might be. Looking at it like trying to figure.
Oh, yeah.
Still be off this picture, though, probably.
Yeah, it might be. But this is the first blockhouse. It's basically a shed about 100 yards away, part of it underground, and you can see some sandbags. And this is where the launch control was. And as I say, it was only 100 yards away, and it was very rudimentary.
That's where those photographers were. You see a piece of that building.
Right. They're standing right next to that building, and so they were not that far away.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you go inside, this is what the controls look like. Again, very rudimentary when you think about where we would actually go over the next few years. And so it was just very simple controls to simply check and see how things were going, if it was fully fueled, if it was all ready to go, and someone would push a button on this and away the rocket would go.
Mm-hmm. Bob, I wanted to give a shout out to Nick Deacon. Glad that he's watching today. He's educating us there that the whack in whack corporal can mean 2 things. It's named without attitude control because the rocket was unguided and lacked a stabilization system. And then he said that's an AI source there. Thank you for giving us that. And the other whack is Woman's Army Corps, a nickname reflecting its status as the little sister to the larger Corporal missile program.
Yeah.
Does that jive with you?
Well, without attitude control is what I've always heard. I just couldn't bring it to mind right away, but that was the reason for WAC whack, and I guess it was comparing it to the other Corporal rocket. So there's sort of a combination of those
Yeah.
two explanations. So appreciate that
Nick Deacon
update
there,
and
yeah.
additional research.
And Fu Do Osaka Joe's watching, so thank you, fan of Walter Cronkite there. So glad that if you're new, once a month or so, we have Bob Granath on to give us a little history lesson about some aspect of the space program. And we've done other things past couple of shows. In fact, we were tossing around before we kicked off the bumper show here today about maybe doing something about urban legends in the space program. So if you've got a good one, let me know about it later.
All
Not
right.
today.
Yeah.
Save them for later. Okay, on there. So
All right.
go ahead, Bob. What a primitive looking
Oh yeah.
Frankenstein sort of situation there. But
Well, yeah.
the
When
guy
you
didn't
think
have
about
a
it,
shirt on. Is that right? Yeah.
that's what it looks like.
Okay.
I
Marty,
figure
you ever
being
worked out there without your shirt on?
yeah, yeah. You got
See, he doesn't have his shirt on now.
yeah.
No AC, I'm sure.
No AC, I'll bet. For
Yeah, I
darn
got
sure.
yeah, oh yeah, I'm sure there was no air conditioning and the building is fairly well confined, so you can
Talk about
imagine
inside this
being
building right
July in Central Florida, near the ocean. Yeah, it's
Well,
got to
look,
be warm.
They've dug in for protection.
Yep.
That's a smart way. Instead of building a concrete wall, they just dug down in the sand and created a barrier.
That's it.
That's using
That's what they did.
1950s ingenuity. Yes, Marty.
Yeah, Michael Bruno was asking, did the Russians also recover V2s and use them for research?
That's correct. They did, and they picked up some that were remaining altogether. There were about 6,000 of the V2s manufactured. Only a few hundred were actually launched, but the Russians picked some up, and Peenemünde was in part of the Russian zone of occupation. And so the Russians started talking to some of these people at Peenemünde, getting their information. And then what history says is one night they started knocking on all their doors and say, you have 1 hour to pack a suitcase and be at the train station with your families. And these people overnight were sent on a train back to Russia to help work with their space program. And so they indeed did launch several V2s. And in fact, the initial rockets built by the Soviets were derivatives of the V2.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's continue with
All right.
Bob and Bumper 8. 75 years ago is why we're talking about this. They had a big celebration at Cape
Yeah.
Canaveral Space Force
Yeah.
Sands History Museum. There we go.
Well, what happened was, as this rocket started going into the air, they had a destroyer, a Navy destroyer off the coast downrange, the USS Sarsfield, and it was there to receive data transmissions from the rocket. What they determined is that as it began to pitch over it, it was only a 10-degree angle instead of a 22-degree angle. And it went to an altitude of 10 miles and went about 200 miles downrange. Did not do everything they wanted, but they were able to successfully launch it and receive data from it. Now, the reason Bumper 8 flew ahead of Bumper 7 is it turned out they were attempting to launch Bumper 7 on July the 19th. They got down to almost zero in the countdown and the engine did not ignite. And so they decided there was a problem with the rocket. They took it down, put Bumper 8 up, launched it on the 24th, and then on the 29th of July 1950, Bumper 7 was launched. And this one you see Bumper 7 being rolled out to the pad.
So I did not know that. Bumper 8 went before Bumper 7.
That's right.
Like Gemini 7
7
went
and
before
6.
Gemini 6. Uh-huh. I love looking at pictures like this. You know, what does a trained eye see there that was there? Look at the scaffold.
Oh, yeah. Now, what I see is the WAC Corporal hasn't been attached yet.
Okay.
And you see at the nose of the V2, there's an opening.
Yeah.
And there on the trailer just in front of it is the whack corporal.
I
What
got
they're
you.
doing
Above your head, they're working on
is
it. Right
getting
there.
ready to attach it to the top of the rocket and slide it down the tube that would be in the top of the V2.
There you go. And what's this in the foreground here? This type of barriers, or they got wire? Yeah, it looks like maybe a wire barrier or something they could put up there.
Yeah. But
Uh,
the gantry is just very rudimentary. Now,
wonder how much the spy versus spy was going on there, that they were making sure. Of course, 19. No, there weren't any spy satellites overhead, but there could be spy airplanes.
oh yeah, they might have
overhead.
had some. But this is the launch of Bumper 7, the one that went off on July the 29th. It also went about 10 miles in altitude, and as it got about 14 miles east of the Cape, the engine shut down and it went into the Atlantic. But the general who was the commander at the Long Range Proving Ground, a Colonel Colonel Harold Turner, not a general, but a colonel. After the two launches took place, he announced to the newspapers, people were seeing these rockets go up and they wondered what's going on. He said everything worked perfect in every way. Wasn't exactly perfect, but what did happen is we were able to bring in rockets, process and launch these rockets, and track them and receive telemetry. And that would be a crucial step forward in getting ready for rockets that would be going off in the near future.
Marty's got another question for you, Bob.
Okay.
Yeah, question from Dean Babcock. Could you explain what is meant by a sounding rocket?
Okay. A sounding rocket, that's a good question, though. It's basically where a rocket goes up and doesn't really go into orbit or anything, but just goes into the atmosphere with instruments to study what's going on in the atmosphere. One of the things that people wondered at this point, if you start sending rockets or satellites, is there going to be radiation out there that will destroy them? Is space flight, going into orbit and staying for days, is it even going to be possible? And of course, one of the questions that we had to answer with the Mercury program is, could humans survive in weightlessness? People often ask, what was the Project Mercury about? Can a human being survive into space? Is radiation going to kill that person? I remember John Glenn explaining that people thought maybe his eyeballs would bug out of the socket.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be able to swallow? Would you be able to urinate in space? What they found out
Process food.
Yeah,
Eliminate waste.
yeah, that's it. And we find out urinating is not a gravity feed system; it's a hydraulic system.
There you go.
And so, we just didn't know very much. And so these sounding rockets would just go up into the atmosphere, collect data, and then come back down again. And of course, the reason for obtaining the ground in Cape Canaveral on the coast of Florida, as we knew as rockets got bigger, they would be needing to go out over the ocean so that if something goes wrong, they go into the ocean and you'd be sending things farther and farther downrange. And one of the things that started the people back at White Sands thinking, we need to find a place where we're launching them over the ocean, not land, is there was one of the V2s that was launched for research purposes at White Sands, went out of control, and it went over into Juarez, Mexico, landed right outside of town, created a big crater. And so the American officials went down to Juarez to check out the situation, make sure all the people there in Mexico were okay. Nobody was hurt. Nothing was destroyed. There was a big hole in the ground, and enterprising people had picked up pieces of the shrapnel and were selling it. And so they said eventually it seemed like some of those pieces of shrapnel looked a whole lot like a tomato soup can. And in fact, when they totaled up the total volume of the debris from that rocket, there was enough debris to build 3 of those rockets. But that was a lesson that said, we got to start launching these things out over water and making sure there's nobody out there. And in fact, even today, we make sure there's no airplanes flying around and there's no ships out in the danger area when we start launching. And we've actually had spatial launches that were delayed waiting for a ship to get out of the danger area downrange.
Well, I don't know if we have any of those bits and pieces from Juarez in our auction there, but
Yeah.
it just shows you the interest of space and any new technology back then. People were willing to pay money to own a piece of it,
Oh yeah.
a memento of it. That's fascinating. There.
Well, I saw a piece of V2 once when I was taking history in high school. My history teacher was named George Duran, and we addressed him as Colonel Duran because we knew he was a retired Army colonel.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had him in 10th, 11th, 12th grade. During my 12th grade year, I said something about Werner von Braun. He said, "Oh, I have some correspondence from Dr. von Braun. I'll bring it in to show you." The next morning, he walks in and hands me this piece of sheet metal about that big. And I'm looking at it, silver on one side. I flip it over, there's mostly white. There's some black down the side. And pretty quickly, I figured out this is a piece from a V2. And I said, "Colonel Duran, is this a piece of a V2?" And he said, "Yeah. How did you get this?" He said, "Well, the first time one of them hit London, Ike wanted to go see it." Ike? He'd been our teacher 3 years, and that day we found out his role in World War II is he was on Dwight Eisenhower's staff at Supreme Allied Commander Headquarters in London.
Holy cow!
And so we thought, well, no wonder he's teaching history. He is history.
Yeah.
And
That's
so that
amazing.
was kind of fascinating.
Well, President Dwight David Eisenhower, who was the supreme commander of all the Allied forces there, like you
That's
said.
right.
And that was
That's right.
such an interesting thing that they chose a person like that, I think,
Oh, yeah.
to coordinate everything. Marty's got a great question, probably from one of you wonderful watchers today. We hope you're appreciating this show with Bob Granath. Go ahead, Marty.
Yeah, this is a question from Steve Holcomb. Wasn't the chain of islands that extend southeast from the Cape also a major consideration in choosing the location for the launch center?
That's absolutely correct. You know, when they were considering where to launch, they said, we've got to make it on the east coast of the United States so that we can take advantage of the rotation of the Earth. And then they picked Florida because you're going to have the best weather. You're not going to have really cold days down in Florida. And then when you launch from the Cape, you have all these string of islands with that belong to countries that are friendly to the United States. And so we could build all these tracking stations, you know, throughout the Atlantic and the Caribbean to track the launches that are going to be launched from the Cape. So that absolutely was one of the main considerations in selecting Cape Canaveral.
Those have a name, collective name. Is that the Aleutian Islands? No, the Caribbean islands, like the
Bermuda, Grand Bahama,
Grand Bahamas was where
Yeah.
John Glenn ship went to.
yeah.
And we'll do a show on that. That's another idea, is making tracking stations. That was very important. When you had companies like Westinghouse were involved in NASA. Like a Westinghouse, they made, appliances. No, they were involved in communications. They're also involved.
Oh yeah,
with the lunar communications on the moon.
that's right.
On there, for example. So Pan Am was another one. Pan Am had you think it'd be in airplanes, but no, they had the big, one of the big contracts down in
That's
the
right.
islands.
Yep.
Is it Aleutian Islands, Marty? You're an old timer. Remember that stuff?
Well, I've nothing to do with old timing, but I think the Aleutian Islands, I think, are off of Alaska.
Off
that
of
area.
Yeah.
Alaska.
Yeah, that's the.
I'm
string
tempted
that
to
goes
go
from
off and grab the wall. We have a little outside the door here, but I think we'll do a program on that instead and talk about that, since y'all are interested in that. Coming to the end here with Bob. Really enjoying this. What we got next here? That's backwards.
There we go. Well, that's a picture taken in 1999. I'm standing on the spot where Bumper 8 took off. The 100-foot
LC4,
square
you said, correct?
platform is all that remains of Launch Pad 3. And so during one of the open houses, went out there and looked and had a picture taken of me standing on the spot. And that's that concrete platform you saw in the aerial shots. The only thing that's left of Pad 3 now is that's the spot
Pad
where
3.
it took place.
Okay. Go ahead, Marty. Another question.
That was the comment sign. Mark.
Comment sign, okay.
Didn't UCF, University of Central Florida, do a little research recently, maybe about a year ago, looking for the blockhouse from Bumper? And I think they found something.
They may have. I don't think there was a whole lot left, but you could probably do some archaeological work and find some of the things that might have gotten inadvertently buried in the area around that
Yeah, that's what they
launch
were
site.
doing. I think they found a small portion of the foundation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very good.
Well, anyway, Bumper was in 1950. 1950. It would be another 8 years before we'd actually launch a rocket into orbit. This is the Jupiter C with the Explorer 1 rocket. Again, very similar. You got a big rocket with sort of a pencil-shaped payload up at the top. This is the first rocket that the United States launched to place an object in Earth orbit. Explorer 1 discovered and confirmed the existence of the radiation belts that go around the Earth that Dr. James Van Allen of the State University of Iowa proposed that belt of radiation existed around the Earth, and that satellite confirmed that it was in fact there.
Interesting, keeping the pattern here, sort of the triangular ring there. Of course, that was January 31st, I believe.
Yeah, right, 1958.
58.
Yep.
And 3 months after the Russians had launched not only Sputnik, a basketball-sized object, but a month later, November 3rd, 57, they launched Laika the dog on that.
Sputnik
so,
2.
So we were a little bit far behind.
Yeah.
Gosh, 9-year gap there, you know.
Yeah, it took that long to get to that point. But
was it funding? Was it any thing that you've seen in history that
Werner von Braun said we could have launched a satellite into Earth orbit in 1956, a year ahead of Sputnik. What happened is President Eisenhower did not want to launch a satellite for peaceful purposes on a rocket that was originally designed to deliver a nuclear warhead. He wanted to be sure that outer space was established for peaceful purposes and that, you know, we would not start putting weapons in space. And so eventually they got to the point where the rocket they used to launch Explorer 1 was ready to go, but it got to the point where the Department of Defense told General John Medeiros, don't even accidentally put an object in orbit. And so they couldn't even launch the rocket. It was ready to go. They wanted to wait on the Vanguard, which, although it was built by the United States Navy, it was strictly for research in space. And so we picked that as the rocket to launch our first satellite, the grapefruit-size Vanguard satellite. And of course, we remember that in December of 1957, it rose up about 3 or 4 inches and then collapsed back on the pad in a colossal fireball. And with that, the pressure to get an American satellite into orbit, you know, began to press on President Eisenhower, and he gave the von Braun team a chance to do it. And he said, how quickly, Dr. von Braun, can you do this? He said, I can do it in 60 days. And General Medeiros said, give yourself a little leeway here. Why don't we say in 90 days? But they got it launched.
Huh.
And so, you know,
Great
that
history
was the
lesson,
start.
Bob.
Oh,
Absolutely, yes. Very, after seeing this horrible war, World War, Eisenhower was so about peace and never letting this happen again, or us having to use nuclear weapons again. On there, quite an amazing president, I think.
Yeah, and so you go from that picture of the Explorer 1 launch.
Marty's got a comment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a comment from Carlton Bailey. He says the islands are the Azores, and we got 10-4 from Steve Holcomb, which means he's probably right.
Azores, there you go. Azores, thank you.
And then we have a question from Dean Babcock. When was the black
jungle man like Carlton? He could figure that out. Yes, the Azores.
Yeah, Dean Babcock is asking, when was the black-yellow paint scheme used on the V2 rocket?
You know, I don't really know how they came up with some of the paint schemes. Some of them, as a rocket takes off, it sometimes starts to roll. And if you have the lines on it, it helps you identify that the fact that it is rolling, and because of the differences on the paint scheme on the fins, you can look at it and you always know exactly what part of the rocket you're looking at.
Good, good. And we got a comment there that Robert Law says he thinks one lady was involved in the launch of Bumper One. He says, you ever hear about any women engineers?
There may well have been, and it's probably an important story to tell, but I haven't come across anything in the research that I've done.
All right, there we've got.
And this is just simply to represent that fact that now 75 years, the Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral Space Force Station is the world's premier multi-user spaceport. And I was heading out to the Kennedy Space Center for a meeting this morning. I passed a banner that is in front of the KSC Visitor Complex, and it says launches this year 71.
71.
2 years ago, we had 72 launches in the entire year. Here we are still in August, we're at 71. Last year the number was 92. This year we're on a pace to go well past 100 launches. And so that year we had this one simple launch using a rocket that was built in Germany and a second stage built in the United States. And now we're at a point where rockets are going up all the time. And here we are on the 27th of August. We've launched 71 rockets from Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center so far this year.
I heard one rumbling this morning drinking my morning coffee,
Yeah.
and didn't even go out and take a peek at it there. That's
Yeah.
Marty's seen 1,000 rocket launches. You've seen hundreds and hundreds.
I'm sure it's in the hundreds. I've simply lost count because there have been so many.
Yeah.
But it's always exciting. We have a bay window in our dining area that faces east. My wife and I call it the launch window because when something's going up, we can stand in that window and watch it go.
Huh. Well, I miss where I lived for a while there to see that happen, but it's amazing, and it's just going to get busier. People want to use
That's
this
right.
coaster. Gorgeous picture. Did you take that?
Oh no,
screenshot?
that's a NASA image. That's one of the crew launches. I think that one was in early 2024.
Mm-hmm. That'd be pad 39A.
Yep.
Okay, there, so you get to 3.5 miles away. Excellent. Here's Bob's website here. Okay, that y'all want to be interested in reading some of his writing about the space age on there. I'm not going to show those ending images there. I don't think we can. I don't want to do that, Marty. You got a comment or question there, Marty?
I have a question from me. I read Dr. Goddard's biography, and in there he talks about when the V2 rockets came up, he had the opportunity to inspect at least one of them. And what he said was, "This is my rocket. This is my design."
Yeah.
So what do you know about that?
Well, that's pretty much true. What happened was, as he was doing his research, and he wrote a book titled "A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes." At the time he was doing his research, back in the early part of the 20th century, there were news organizations that were making fun of him, calling him the Moon Man and all this sort of thing, and making a lot of fun of it. Even the New York Times published an article that a rocket cannot operate in outer space because there's no atmosphere against which for the thrust to push, which means they didn't understand one of the most basic elements of Newton's third law. For every action, there is always an equal and opposite reaction. It is the exhaust coming out of the rocket that pushes the rocket forward. And so that way it can operate in the vacuum of outer space. So he's doing all this research. There were some organizations in the United States that were making fun of him, although he was getting some funding from the Guggenheim Foundation and from Charles Lindbergh, who were interested in his work. But a group of people that were really paying attention to his work was the Society for Spaceflight in Germany that was headed up with Hermann Oberth, who was a contemporary of Goddard, but his 17-year-old student that was really seemed like he had a lot of potential for developing rockets was Werner von Braun, because at the time, even though he was only 17-year-old, he was working on his doctorate. And of course, what happened was they took all of this that Goddard was developing in the United States and started applying it to their aggregate series of rockets. So when you get to the A4, the aggregate 4, which of course was renamed the V2, it has a lot of the technology that went into Goddard's rockets. Now, one of the things that did happen is at some point during the 1960s, because Robert Goddard was a hero of Werner von Braun, he did a couple of things. One, he encouraged the Postal Service to issue a commemorative postage stamp honoring Robert Goddard, and also worked to have NASA pay his widow, Goddard's widow, money to cover the fact that NASA was using so many of his patents. And so, when Goddard looked at and I think what happened, there's this one that crashed when it was launching from Peenemünde on the Baltic coast of Germany. It crashed near Sweden. And so the British picked it up and they brought part of it back to the United States where Goddard could look at it. And he said, yeah, this all looks familiar.
Also, the other side of the fence story there is when von Braun was being interrogated, whatever you want to call it, about how he knew all this. He was very frank with like, well, your rocket scientist Robert Goddard wrote all about this, and Robert Goddard had it all figured out in the 1920s. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think had he had money, he would have orbited something, in the 1940s.
Oh yeah.
But such is life, such is fate. Great Robert Goddard died in 1945 of lung cancer. I believe was
That's right.
his affliction there, and a lot of these people smoked cigarettes like crazy, very in vogue at the time, people thought, and then they didn't think anything about cancer and that sort of stuff. Von Braun also is a heavy smoker. So anyway, Bob, thank you so much for a great program. We've learned so much today, as usual, on there. Marty, any parting comments, shots there? Why don't you say hello to everybody there and thank them for watching today?
All right.
Dave
Stange, Dr. Keith Sowell, Cliff Watson, R.G. Jubilee, Elena Akahari.
Yeah, she's in
Dean,
South Africa.
All right. Dean Babcott, Robert Law, Steve Yoakum, Gary Gerald, Tom Usiak, Carlton Bailey, Michael Bruno, Tom
Celentano.
Celentano.
Up there in Connecticut, near Hartford, I think.
Futero, you want to help me on that one?
Hooray do Osako Joe.
Oh, okay. Well, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we appreciate you watching. Tell
Doug,
Do Ray Me to
Forrest.
join us also, okay?
Yeah, well, it's great that people are tuning in. I know a lot of these people, and
and my daughter Jessie with my granddaughters McKinley and Macy watching today. So take good care of your husband and daddy there, ladies. So yes, great. We learned so much. You add so many layers to the story you bring here, and we look forward to doing it next time, Bob, for sure. Well, and seriously, if you got an idea that you'd like to have Bob or see his website here, that story he's printed there that you'd like to see on Stay Curious, please let us know. Bob, tomorrow we got another great guest, somebody who you know, Mr. Terry White.
Oh, yeah.
And Terry will be stopping by, and we're going to talk about the landing gear, particularly, I think, the nose landing gear of the shuttle tomorrow. So you're going to learn a little bit about that, whether you want to or not. So stay curious, folks. Thank you all for being so loyal to our program here. Our algorithms and our numbers are really going up all the time, and we couldn't do it without you all that have been hooked on it for 5 years, sharing with other people. So let's go out of here, Bob, and take this museum relic and just see how far it'll fly. How about that? So, well, we won't do that, but we'll put it back in its proper place in our hallway of the early days of space flight that we celebrate here at the American Space Museum. So, again, thank you, everybody. Terry White tomorrow, the mustachioed manager of the shuttle garages, will be here to talk about some of the landing gear minutia that you don't know about. That's why you're staying curious. Until next time, I'm Mark Marquette saying I can't wait to see you in our museum to bridge the space between us. Catch, Marty.